Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Payne Fund, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Ralph Delarada. I'm president of Citizens Bank in Ohio and former president of the City Club's board of directors. So it's nice to be up here again. It's been a while. Citizens Bank is really proud to be a corporate member of the City Club, and we're proud to support the City Club's efforts to provide a forum for conversations on critical issues, such as our topic of today. I'm pleased to introduce today's forum, a panel discussion on the future of manufacturing in Ohio. While many people think that higher education and healthcare are driving our regional economy, the truth is manufacturing still matters, and matters a lot. Output from manufacturing is currently 20% above the pre-2009 levels. Part of this growth is due to Ohio's manufacturing sector's commitment to investing in technology. Technology experts indicate that technology will increase productivity by 75% by 2025 for the 18 counties that comprise Northeast Ohio. However, the increased production doesn't necessarily mean more jobs. Why? One word: automation. The Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts manufacturing jobs will continue to decline next year, a finding consistent with a recent White House report which predicted an 83% chance that automation will replace a job that pays $20 an hour. As the rise of robots and automated machinery continues, manufacturing may become more efficient and productive, but at what cost to human workers? How are manufacturing companies and institutions of higher education across the region and state grappling with this rise in automation? Who is retraining the current workforce? And are the programs benefiting the company and the worker? Looking ahead, what does preparing a manufacturing workforce of the future actually involve? So we've assembled an impressive group of local and national leaders to offer their perspectives. Leading our discussion is Crain's Cleveland business publisher and editor, Elizabeth McIntyre. Elizabeth joined Crain's Cleveland business in April 2014 after spending about 2 decades at the Plain Dealer, and most recently as deputy managing editor for content. She has also worked at the National Association of College Stores as vice president of communications and public relations, and at the Cleveland Foundation as a public relations officer. Ms. McIntyre, I turn the forum over to you and for you to introduce our panel.
All right, thank you, Ralph, very
much.
And thank you for really giving us an idea of the landscape of manufacturing. I think it's clear that manufacturing still matters. It matters significantly in Northeast Ohio, in the state, and throughout the Midwest, which is why today's conversation is so important, and I'm glad you could be with us today. I'd like to introduce our panelists. Right next to me is Alicia Booker. She's the Vice President of Manufacturing at Cuyahoga Community College. She has an extensive background in workforce development and with connecting employers with employees. Thank you for joining us today. Scott Paul is the President of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, which was established by some of America's leading manufacturers and the United Steelworkers Union. AAM works to make American manufacturing top of mind for voters and our national leaders. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Cleveland. And Mike Siegal is chairman and CEO of Olympic Steel, based in Bedford Heights. Mike is a Cleveland native, and he joined Olympic Steel in 1974, and he's led the publicly traded company since being named president in 1984. Thank you for being with us. It's nice to have a manufacturer on the panel, to say the least. So a consistent complaint that I hear all the time from manufacturers or from shop foremen even is the lack of a skilled labor pool from which to draw prospective workers. This problem, finding the qualified workers for the job openings, is what we refer to as the skills gap. So what's behind the problem of the skills gap in manufacturing? Alicia?
Well, I think it's important to note that the skills gap really is a complex issue. When people hear it, I think people think that it's just because individuals simply don't have the skills for the job, and that is partially true. But what's challenging and what continues to be a challenge for us is, in some cases, you do have individuals who are trained for these jobs. We have a number of individuals in companies and higher education institutions that are in the training business. The problem is a lot of the jobs now are further out from where the population is. And so that continues to be a problem. It all nets to a skills gap, but that really is more reflective of a transportation gap or an economic issue because people simply can't get to the jobs that they have the skills for. And then we all know that work has changed. Work does not look the same that it used to. And so there is a need to not only upskill our existing talent, so those individuals who are already working, but also to prepare that incoming group of the talent pool, those younger individuals with the skills that they need for these jobs. And although they're very tech savvy, they're not always interested in the type of work that they need to do using that technology. So some of that is just about education and information.
And what about the baby boomer issue when it comes to the skills gap? Mike, have you seen a problem with that, with the baby boomers retiring out? It's creating openings?
Well, I don't see the baby boomers retiring that much because most of us don't have the money to retire. So I don't know that that's going to happen so quickly. But if I can, Elizabeth, I'd like to address the other question as well. Sure. Because I really do think the skill gaps come from a lack of understanding of what public school is supposed to do for students, which is to prepare them for life. And I think that this construct of liberal arts education, as well as everybody should go to college because you earn more money with a college degree, forget the debt and paying back the interest on the debt. I think we really have to look at the talent pool at a much younger age and say how many people should not be going to college and how many people should be getting skills at the high school level so that they can come out and actually have a productive life and start to give them the technical skills to work in manufacturing and start to have more trade schools and more distributive education kinds of constructs than we have, because I think the narrative has led us astray to some degree that everybody's supposed to go to college. And so I think not everybody should go to college, and I think a lot of people need to be developed into having skills so that they can actually have a middle-class lifestyle with not necessarily a fully developed education, because some people just have different learning skills. But I do think the baby boomers will be retiring. I think the largest age group in the United States right now is 26 years old. So in the next construct of what is coming along, there'll be plenty of workers. It's just, people want to be playing video games and developing video games. And I think that we're losing a lot of social skills. Our mantra is always heads up, look up, put the phone down, everybody. Oh, sorry. Okay. Be present in the moment, right? No, but seriously, I think too much technology has driven us to lose the interface of human relations, which is where it all begins.
So would you see a kind of a trend towards going back to the vocational school model in high schools the way it used to be?
I would like that. Yes, I think that is a elegant solution to some of the skills gaps that's out there. I mean, not everybody is graduating high school, and not everybody is coming out of high school prepared to earn a living in an appropriate fashion. So yes, I would like to see more trade school development.
Scott, what about your view of the skills gap?
I might have a more nuanced view, because if you listen to employers, they will never find enough qualified candidates for a job. Employer surveys are a tricky way to do that. I realize that there are serious challenges, though. If you look at Labor Department data, there's a challenge, but it's not an insurmountable one. And I think Alicia spoke to what of that. Some of the jobs aren't where the people are. And there's been mobility issues, there's been depopulation issues, there's been this demographic bulge. When you look at manufacturing and you broaden the lens over the last 20 years, you had an era which saw the most rapid decline in manufacturing jobs that we've seen, even faster than during the Great Depression. We lost a third of all manufacturing jobs. Most of that was due to imports as well as to slow growth and to recessions. It had very little, if anything, to do with automation at the time. And the system responds to that. So if those jobs aren't demand, community colleges are going to train for IT, for other types of things. Now, we have this demographic issue, and you have an aging workforce, and it needs to be replaced, and there will be opportunities. McKinsey, a consulting firm, just this week released a report. They estimate that there could be up to 2.4 million new manufacturing job opportunities over the next decade. It takes some policy to get us there. And certainly the workforce is going to look different. When we entered the Great Recession, more than half of workers in manufacturing didn't have anything beyond a high school degree. And those are the manufacturing workers that are losing their jobs at the fastest rate. Manufacturing will require something more than a high school degree, and it's going to take an array of policies from vocational education in high school to technical schools to apprenticeship and other kinds of other forms of work-based learning, and taking example of kind of the virtual learning that we have now to address it, I think.
So Alicia, talk to us a little bit about the work that you're doing at Tri-C to develop this future workforce.
Yeah, we are integrating, just as Scott said, the apprenticeship training. That really has to evolve and definitely has to develop in the region and across the nation as it relates to manufacturing. Other states, other countries are doing it, and we really have to be more aggressive with apprenticeship training. And so we're definitely looking at apprenticeship training as an opportunity and training that the students can get at the high school level. So it's not necessarily that same vocational training that we used to know, the shop class that was in the back of the high school that students took. It's that training that does bring them to college. And so I don't think that conversation for us is really either or. It really is and. It's education and training. It's college and career. And so those are the types of programs that we're developing. Some of you may know it as an earn and learn model. It's a model that brings that student into the college, but also gives them an opportunity to get into the workforce, because it's those workforce skills that are going to be most germane as the students begin to develop and evolve, and especially in manufacturing. But some of the challenge and one of the things that we're having to do at the community college is really train across discipline. Again, another shift in paradigm, because most of us who went to college, we're very familiar with college training in the sense that if you were an education major, you took education courses, or if you were an accounting major, you took accounting courses. Now you have to integrate all of that across the spectrum. So manufacturing training now looks very different, because they absolutely need critical thinking skills. They need problem solving. They need to know how to physically work a machine, but they also need to know technology. They may need to know anatomy if they're working in healthcare, but manufacturing for the healthcare industry. If it's aerospace engineering, they may need to know another level. And so that is something that we're doing at the colleges. We're really taking a look at the continuum and the spectrum of education, saying not only can we grab all of these high school graduates, our average age at the college, particularly in workforce training, is 28 years old. So that's not that 18-year-old high school graduate. It is that person who says, hey, yes, I have a life, or I've started a career. And in a lot of cases, it's that person who already has a 4-year degree. And so we're looking at developing that training that can meet their need and also respond to what we're hearing from our employers and from policy on how do we then begin to develop the real talent and the real core knowledge base that we need for future of the workforce.
Mike, you have trained, retrained, hired countless employees over your career. How have you seen the workforce change over the decades that you've been involved in manufacturing?
Well, it's an interesting concept. On the entry level, not much, quite honestly. I think drugs are more prevalent, which makes it more difficult in certain respects, and certainly that aspect of, as we talked about, legalization of marijuana may create some difficulty in terms of the hiring practices. I do think technology has changed for better and worse. It used to be on the factory floor particularly, nobody could leave their station to go make a phone call because there was a payphone and you could restrict the access during the work hours. Now everybody's got their cell phone with them, and as they're watching the machines run, they might be sitting there, and whether they're always having an emergency call or they're playing a game, you don't know. So in one respect, technology has made it, I think to some degree, more unsafe because people are being more distracted by technology that's available to them in a handheld kind of device. So that's a great concern about the safety issues that we have on the factory floors today. And I think there is a much greater push towards safety. And so I would say that at the end, most people want to have a good job with good benefits. And so to get them to show up on time is a little bit easier than it used to be in some respects. But I would say that it hasn't changed much, because there's a lot more in-house training. Once you have them and they've established themselves to be capable of being there for a couple of years, we're putting a lot more investment into the training of the individual in our stores than probably what we did 10 and 20 years ago.
Scott, from a policy perspective, what can be done to develop the workforce of the future?
It's a very good question, and policy does play a role in this. I think obviously the engagement of employers is critical, in having them with some skin in the game, and having a local sense of what the employment needs and sectoral partnerships is important. But they can be supported by really good state and federal policies. I'm excited about the opportunity for industrial apprenticeships. I think that they offer a lot of potential solutions to this. That can be driven by how those apprenticeships are registered. It can be driven by offsetting the cost partly for some of those apprenticeships, particularly for smaller firms where it may be more of a burden, and also setting some standards in terms of wages that could be expected. I think that Congress and the states working together, one of the more effective approaches that I've seen recently is when you do have those sectoral partnerships where you have a number of firms in the same type of industry that are working together collaboratively to create that workforce. I will say the other thing about this, and we're in an age of quarterly earnings reports for these public companies, and they're always looking to cut costs. You got to invest in your workforce. You got to invest in your workforce, and finding a way to recognize that, I think is very, very important. I know one of our stakeholders, ArcelorMittal, with the steelworkers, has a program where they'll essentially offset the costs of a 2-year community college program, and you have a great job at the end of that, but that's not without some cost to the company. And they are, they're setting a great example. There ought to be some type of public policy recognition for that, because there's a whole lot of other folks that kind of free ride on that type of program as well.
Right. Yeah. As I think about developing this future workforce for manufacturing, it seems to me that one of the obstacles is that manufacturing has an image problem. So how do you combat that?
That is an issue. It absolutely is. I think marketing and growth and advancement in any industry is a factor, but manufacturing it's an issue with manufacturing, because as we look at the individuals that we have coming in, so the new millennials, the new students that are coming behind those millennials, they all have a level of skill that everyone wants. So what is that trigger? What is that thing that's going to make manufacturing opportunities rise to the top? It's not just the data, because we know the data. We know that there are family-sustaining wages. And matter of fact, they're some of the highest wages in this region, but you still don't have that same, flux of students going towards those occupations. I definitely think when we are looking at that talent pool coming up, you have to address that with the family unit, with the parents, with those who are influential around those students, because what we have is we still have that same message of everyone must get a 4-year degree. We have that one path and that one track that we're continuing to kind of force feed students that right now don't fit into that framework. So we have to change our narrative somehow. And I do think it's a joint effort. I definitely think, the state effort I know the Ohio Manufacturers Association is moving this Making Ohio push, and so making manufacturing in Ohio, and there's some branding strategies there. I think collectively with industry partners, as well as our workforce and economic development partners, we can begin to change the message and change the narrative.
Mike?
Yeah, recruit, recruit, recruit. I think what we're doing now, much more so than ever before, is we're going on campuses across our regions, and we're recruiting crazy. So that what we learned is you don't send old people to college campuses to recruit. So we're taking our under 30-year-olds and probably under 25-year-olds, and we're sending them to college campuses to recruit, because nobody is thinking about it. Nobody sits around and said, I'd really like to be in the steel business. The number one question we generally get is, there's still a steel business? So we're recruiting like crazy. We tell them about the benefits, about the educational reimbursement, things that you provide to enhance their ability to have a further career and accelerate through your organization. But without recruitment, waiting for somebody to come to your door is a failure for sure. So I think that's a significant amount of change that we have to do.
Right. Education, of course, plays a big role in this, but manufacturers do too. What do you see the role of manufacturers in attracting this future workforce?
I think manufacturers, as Mike said, have to be on the front line of that recruitment effort. We talk about it, we think about it all the time. Colleges send out recruiters, everyone sends out recruiters, but when you can connect an industry, not just one company, but a whole industry, to the opportunity, it becomes very, very prevalent, very relevant, and very real, not only to the students, but also to their parents. And so that is definitely something that we have to look at, is how can we collectively engage. So from the community college perspective, how do we engage with employers so that we can have a shared message or shared brand? We talk about, Scott mentioned the ArcelorMittal program. That is one of the programs we run at Cuyahoga Community College. And they are very aggressive about growing their own talent. And I think that is a message that we can definitely, join with others in the industry to help support the need. But if employers show up, if they are present, if they are a part of the message, it definitely will take on a whole new look.
Now, Mike, have you done anything around apprenticeships?
Oh, yeah.
How does that look?
Well, particularly, we like to go, we know the A students aren't coming, so we don't recruit the A students. But what we try and do is get on the college campuses when young men and women are juniors. We want to get them before they're graduating. By the time they're seniors, they're already decided on a path. So we actually try and get sophomores and juniors to come into our facilities, and we'll guarantee them the job when they're a senior. So we want to bring them in. We want to bring them in the second year and then ultimately guarantee them that they will have a job. So I think you can do that. People actually need jobs. People actually want to have jobs when they graduate. And I think, we work with Tri-C as well, but we work with some four-year colleges. We want to go on those campuses, because the one thing colleges should be doing for the money that they charge particularly, not the community colleges, they should be guaranteeing their students that they can place them. So in working with the institutions, we actually are an employer that always needs more employees. So we ultimately want to bring them in for the training. We want to bring them in on the internships, the apprenticeships, and we want to guarantee them the job when they're coming out of school.
Sure. We're going to pivot a little bit. Now, Scott, what about what's going on in Washington right now? Do you see, there's a lot going on in Washington, but I'm going to focus on just one aspect of it. Tax reform. What's the potential impact on manufacturing?
Look, I think it's way too early to tell, because there are a lot of hoops that have to be jumped with. It could be helpful. It will impact different firms in different ways. I think the important thing from a manufacturing perspective is to understand, more than any other sector of our economy, it's in global competition. We're competing with firms and governments from around the world in a way that a lot of other sectors in the United States aren't. And tax reform needs to reflect that. And I think this goes back to workforce in one important way. And I think it's one of the impediments. Kids are rational actors. If they've seen that there's been a whole bunch of jobs that have been outsourced, they're going to flock to that industry. They're going to go to the fast food joint, to the hospital, something they know is not going to be moved to China. And so I think that's one step. The second step, I think, is that politicians who love to talk about Made in America, virtually none of them want their kids to work in it. That is something that we need to change as well. That the American dream needs to be redefined, and it's not about peak college, where you have a lot of kids who have accumulated a whole lot of debt and are over-credentialed for jobs. I mean, I think reestablishing a pathway through high school with technical training and on-the-job training and you can get into a great family supporting job. I think it's important to make that connection and for our policymakers to recognize that, both through the tax code, but in a lot of other economic policy aspects as well.
So do we need to start even younger, exposing kids to manufacturing? Do we need to bring it down to the middle school level?
I think you need to bring it down to the elementary school level. Tri-C has started, we did a soft launch over the summer, and we're launching year-round programming through what we're calling our Nuts and Bolts Academy, and that is specifically designed for manufacturing. A partner of ours, Magnet, is using early college, early career. So that's addressing the high school age. We're doing some initiatives around the middle school where we're actually going out. We have a mobile training unit, and as much as we want that to support industry and the training that we need for our companies that are just outside of Cleveland, we also are using that as a tool to get into the high schools, the middle schools, and the elementary schools to give students that look, that feel, that touch, so that they can see what manufacturing really is and they can experience it. But what we're looking at is an 8 to 18. So we want to reach them early. It is a very strategic and intentional effort, because when you begin to expose them, now are they going to understand complex equipment and all of that at that age and programming? Absolutely not. But there are things that students and young people understand at their age. They understand about making things. They understand about building, about what we call and what we've really sustained ourselves on. We are a country and definitely a region built on making things. And that's what kids do. And so we want to expose them to opportunities to do that. And the great thing is the technology right now supports it. Now we have the virtual reality. We have training right now that we do in engineering for our adult students that, haven't done math in a few years, but we do it with VR technology. So they wear the goggles and they're learning. And to them, it's just cool. It's like playing a game, but they're learning. And so we can expose young people to that same kind of atmosphere and add in a company visit or a company tour and give them an opportunity to see what's happening. And I think we can definitely make an impact. High school is absolutely too late. Like Mike said, that senior, it's probably already on the path. But you can address it with high school, middle, and to expose young people at the elementary school level.
All right, great. Stephanie's going to come up right now.
Stephanie Jansky, Director of Programming at the City Club, and today we're enjoying a Friday forum on the future of manufacturing in Ohio, featuring Alicia Booker, Vice President at Cuyahoga Community College, Scott N. Paul, President for the Alliance for American Manufacturing, and Michael D. Siegal, Chairman and CEO of Olympic Steel Incorporated. Our moderator is Crain's Cleveland business publisher and editor, Elizabeth McIntyre. We're about to begin the audience Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, and may we have the first question, please?
Yes, in terms of attracting new workers, do you find young immigrants to be a valuable talent pool?
Yes. Yes. I don't know how else to answer that. Particularly welders. I think the average age of a welder in America today is somewhere north of 65 years old. There's not a lot of panache behind somebody teaching their child how to weld in America. So we're seeing, particularly in the immigrant societies, where they've grown up on farms, they've grown up fixing things, the immigrant talent in terms of their physical ability to work at a younger age is profoundly better than generally those who are born and educated here.
I'd like to ask two questions, really. First one is that the introduction to the panel by Ralph today said that there's a report that $20 an hour jobs and below, I guess, will not exist because of automation, and I'd like to know if the panel thinks that's really true. it seems to me there'll always be some entry-level jobs. At lower levels, maybe there'll be a faster increase to a higher skill level and a higher salary. The second thing I'd like to ask about is, I have two grandsons, 5th and 8th grade, and they've been doing Legos, building things since they were 3, or even younger, in the case of the younger one who followed his older brother. And now the older one's really into a robotics club in middle school. Seems to be a natural progression from Legos and robotics to manufacturing.
With respect to automation, I am not afraid of robots or automation. I think, if you look in manufacturing facilities today that are competitive, they are highly automated already, and those that aren't would be the outliers. Other sectors of the economy are going to be far more greatly impacted by automation. If you think about transportation services, other types of services, and IT, automation and artificial intelligence are going to have a much more dramatic impact on the workforce. Now, within manufacturing, they will change the skills that are required. And that's been a continuous process throughout kind of the industrial revolutions that we've seen in manufacturing, and manufacturing has always been able to adapt to that. The biggest driver of manufacturing job loss, or it's mostly macroeconomic factors again. There is a connection between the shock of Chinese imports and manufacturing job loss. There is a connection between slow economic growth and recessions and manufacturing job loss. There is not as big of a correlation between the adaptation of automation and manufacturing job loss, because what we've always been great at is coming up with new products to make, increasing our market share, and growing our economy, and attracting new consumers to buy the stuff. And all of that is impacted by stuff outside of technology. So I'm really confident that within manufacturing we can get it right. What I'm less confident about, I think, are some of these other policy choices that will have to be made, because someone's going to be making the robots. I want to see them be made in Cleveland and in Ohio rather than in China. Someone's going to be making autonomous vehicles. Someone's going to be making drones. I'd like to see them being made in the United States, and it's going to take a different set of skills than manufacturing did a decade ago, but it's entirely possible. I'm optimistic if we can get these other things right.
I would, if I could just add on, I would agree with Scott. What we're beginning to see from a training perspective is beginning to train our students in collaborative robotics. We're training them to work alongside the robot. Those jobs that were traditionally hand done now are going to be automated, but they will need someone to program that robot. They will need someone to oversee the cell. And so we're not at the place yet where robots are totally doing all of the job of a human. You still have a human component. That really is the opportunity. Manufacturing has shed jobs, but I don't believe, as Scott said, it's not because of the automation. It's because of the other changes in the industry, more economic factors. And you're absolutely right on the robotics. The robotics club, that learning that automation, that interest in that is exactly the skill set that's needed for the future of manufacturing. So you're right on target with that.
But going back to your first question about Ralph's comment, certainly in financial services, there'll never be anything below $20 an hour. But in manufacturing, look, there's still an entry-level job for the not fully skilled individual. All right, somebody's got to load the truck. It's not always going to be a robot. It's not always going to be a machine. Somebody at 3 in the morning has got to pick up the bundle and put it on the truck. So there is that aspect of entry level that somebody will have to have. So whatever minimum wage is, hopefully it gets to a point where it's a livable wage. May never get there again, but hopefully it does. But I think it's not just the wage. You have to look at the benefit package. So healthcare still matters. Your retirement package. I don't care that nobody thinks they're going to get to retirement age when they're 18 or 22, but the reality is you wake up one day and you're here. So I would say that within the total comp, relative to what somebody's personal life objective is, that entry-level job is still very important to get on the spectrum of your career, regardless of your education level. So that job will always exist.
Oftentimes, it's not that first job. The first job's easy to get. It's that next step up
Yep.
that is the problem, I
Correct.
think, for a lot of people.
This is for Mr. Siegal. You talked about, you say you're constantly training and recruiting employees, and you mentioned basically some minor criticism of K through 12 education, essentially, putting people on the college track all the time. Are there specific deficiencies that you see people coming in with, having gone through, let's say, high school or even college, certain areas you think they're lacking in? And if you had your druthers, what would you like to see the schools do to change that?
Well, the answer is I was only a little critical because I want to be nice in a public forum. I would say that self-discipline, self-respect. Self-respect in the United States is really interesting today. And the degradation, I think, of personal self-respect, regardless of gender, is a significant issue. We're seeing some things come to the forefront. Very difficult for women in the workplace because of lots of abuse that, somebody thinks it's cute. So we've had all those issues all the time. It continues, and the dialogue we're having today, particularly, I think, is very positive for self-respect, but also self-discipline. I think it's really interesting that one of the hardest things we have is to get somebody to show up on time. I sat in front of a forum and somebody said, how late is it that I can come in and still be considered on time? and you sit there and, and by the way, seriously, why should I be dinged for being 5 minutes late? Right? so that aspect of personal responsibility is not necessarily part of the narrative. So if you study the Deming philosophy, Deming says we don't need oversight because there's a personal discipline, personal self-respect. Well, that was great in the Japanese culture, but here I would tell you that aspect of being taught to just show up on time, being critical, is something that isn't intuitive or native. It really is one of those aspects that I think we could do better on in school to teach people self-respect and self-discipline.
So it's those soft skills.
A lot of emotional intelligence that isn't being taught.
All right.
So on the flip side of that, I'm wondering if you could speak to what you're either seeing or what you think you should be seeing more of businesses doing to make changes and improve on their behalf. So we've talked about the supply side and what K-12 is doing wrong, but it seems like there's a lot of opportunity for businesses to make changes and shift because the reality is we have the workforce that we have today.
I'll let somebody else take that one.
Well, I'll give you my perspective briefly on that. I do think that there has to be a transformational change in business to get the job done. I will also be quick to add that there are a lot of folks who are already engaged in that kind of change. But at the same time, over the last 2 decades, the percentage of employer-provided training has shrunk dramatically. And I pointed before to those quarterly earnings reports, and that's a big factor why. They are cost-driven. It's not about sustainability and a long-term view and investing in your workers and recruiting them or in upskilling them. It's viewing them as very disposable. And that creates a recruitment challenge because if a worker is viewed as being disposable, they're not going to be attracted to that employer, and particularly knowing the mindset, or at least what I'm told is the mindset of millennials. I don't pretend to know it actually, but it's. They value that kind of relationship and having an ethical employer and not being viewed as disposable. And I think that's going to be critically important as folks move forward. I would also say that for a long time, businesses would say, well, there's a skills gap, I can't find any workers, someone else solved the problem for me. And that army never came in. And now I think, there's a reality. It takes a lot of people, communities where this is successful, there's all the stakeholders engaged, the community colleges, the high schools, the employers, the labor movement, the community leaders, they're all engaged in this. And if you have an ecosystem like that, you're establishing the framework for success. And what we need to see now is just to scale that. And I think that will provide one pathway to being helpful. Yeah.
So I like just two things. One, leadership develops culture. Culture is the most critical element of your organizational structure. So it is about better leadership. Two, I do want to comment that was said earlier is short-term desires by Wall Street is harmful for the development of the kind of things we would like for society. We are so transactionally short in terms of our mentality. So where a Bitcoin could be worth gazillions of dollars and a real intense capital structured business that has been around for 100 years, that still is developing jobs and building community and providing good benefits is not valued at all on a relative scale of Wall Street. Wall Street is kind of driving very bad behaviors of CEOs to develop short-term interests, which is conflicted with culture.
All right.
When Wilbur Ross took over what was left of Jones & Laughlin Steel out of bankruptcy, he was able to drop the price of steel by about $20 a ton because he was able to shed the obligation of the company to provide pensions and health care benefits to retirees and, frankly, to new employees. If you had your druthers, what one or two government policies, whether it's federal, state, or local, would you like to see implemented that would actually, in your view, help create manufacturing jobs?
So I'm glad you didn't ask for the silver bullet, and I have a couple of things that we can focus on. I think getting trade policy right is important because, as I said, manufacturing, like very few other sectors in our economy, is in direct global competition with other firms and with other governments. And we do a terrible job of enforcing our trade laws. And I agree with the president. We've negotiated some really bad agreements that have disadvantaged our firms. And none of this will matter if we don't get trade policy right. So that's number one. I think that there is I think having a manufacturing strategy is important, and understanding that the strength of our nation was built through manufacturing. Alexander Hamilton got this right in 1791. You won't see it in the musical that's coming to Cleveland, but they don't talk about manufacturing, but he got that right. And it's important to recapture that you have to, all of your economic decisions, you got to think about how is it going to affect a guy like Mike and the people who he works. That means building infrastructure, investing in workers, creating a research and development infrastructure. And that kind of a framework creates the opportunity of success because we have really entrepreneurial folks, we have really efficient and hard workers, we have amazing technology, we have crappy policy. And that's why we don't succeed.
My question is about unions. What role do you think unions will play in developing the workforce for the future?
Is that a policy or?
I would just say is that I represent a labor business partnership. The reality is that when people blame unions for the loss of manufacturing jobs, it's important to understand that unions represent about less than 10% of manufacturing workers. And you've seen it. I'm glad you mentioned Wilbur Ross because it was a partnership with the steelworkers that made it possible, and the steelworkers took on the pension and the retiree health care benefits. And so you have seen unions, I think, respond to the changes in our economy and the changes in the global competition. And at the auto firms, at the steel firms, they have made some really hard decisions. But having them as partners, I think, is really, really important. And it's one of the reasons why there used to be a lot of industrial apprenticeships, and there aren't so many today. And there's a direct correlation there with the decline of the unionized workforce. And so I think that they're relevant, they're important. I think there's other factors that will determine whether more of the workforce will be unionized or not, but I think their contribution is very important.
So I have union and non-union facilities. I don't see a big difference, quite honestly. What I do see is if you create that culture of dignity and respect, where people come to work every day understanding that the commitment of the organization you operate is committed to the well-being of the individual, unions, non-unions, it makes no difference. Obviously, not every organization, I think, is like mine, and so unions have a place in the workforce, And they will continue to have a place in the workforce because lots of organizations don't respect the individual. But I think it's just about individual respect and the culture that you try and create for your own organizations. And so, to me, I don't really see a big difference between the two in terms of how we operate, in terms of and our relations with the employees.
Good afternoon. Thanks for your time. One observation and one question. So, from a former insurance and financial services person, now in manufacturing, observation on the marijuana issue. So, for any employers in the room, House Bill 523, if you want to review the tenets of that, fortunately in Ohio, our policymakers have been very thoughtful and very responsible around being very employer-centric when it comes to things that you're protected against and things you have to do post-accident and what you are not responsible for. So it might be of interest. My question is, many of us represent service or other such organizations that support you and want to support you. We talk about 21 counties. What would you like for us to do as we function in the Cantons of the world, in the Akrons of the world, to better support and bring together this one collective body? For example, just this morning, coming from Canton, you know, the guys, our friends at Timken Steel, are not having a good day. They had a very tragic accident and fire overnight. So what can we do? That's one example. But what can we do to help the schools, to help the colleges, to help your workforce, and to help you with processes and employment? Thank you.
So from a community college and workforce development perspective, I think your question was really interesting. I've seen some great models of best practices across the country. One model really was that entry-level model, and you've kind of heard it referenced a little here. We talked about the entry-level stop as that first stop. It's always going to be there. And one of the models that I've seen, it was across industry. So it wasn't based on one sector. It was with, in this case, it was the financial sector who had an issue with bilingual customers and being able to communicate. Healthcare had the same issue. Yes, in the front line, how do we help them communicate? We were representing workforce, and we have a bilingual student population who needs opportunities, who needs internship. Manufacturing needed jobs. The manufacturing jobs required a higher level, let's say of math and other skill set. And so we used the opportunities available, whether it was a summer internship or other kind of engagement from the service sector and from the healthcare sector to give those students that first step, that first opportunity for employment to help them learn the skills they needed. And for those who wanted to stay in that sector, they had job opportunities, and others were able to then move on into manufacturing, to go into training. And so I know it's a foreign concept, but we have to begin to think about a strategic approach to this that may not look like what we've always done. The other thing is exactly what you just shared, is sharing that message, sharing that support. I thought as tragic as the recent events were with the hurricanes, what was wonderful and beautiful to see was an outpouring of support. It didn't matter if you were union or non-union, labor or management. You saw an outpouring of support. And that's exactly the type of effort that we need behind things that we're seeing that are impacting our manufacturers and other global impacts. Because this, what affects Northeast Ohio, is absolutely going to affect the Cantons and the Akrons of the world.
You want us to address the drug issue? Sure. Okay. Anybody want to do it? No. Look, we have an epidemic, okay? So we'll leave the methamphetamine and the opioid issue out and what government should do about that. But as it relates to medical marijuana, I mean, let's not kid each other. I'm also not a big fan of like all these safety dogs on airplanes now, because everybody has their dog. It's no longer about the person who actually needs the dog. I think we have to be very careful, because a lot of it has to do about liability and your knowledge of liability, okay? And so there's always this risk of what you do in the privacy of your home is none of my business, right? On the other side, how you come to work, right, is my business, right? Once you come into our door, right, then you are my business. And if you're the person who's impaired in any way, shape, or form, and you hurt the person next to you, I'm liable. I'm liable, right? My organization is liable for that. So we certainly understand where medical marijuana and the effects of both psychedelic drugs have on PTSD. We're aware of how stress can be dealt with on a variety of issues and how marijuana is helping cancer patients. But just to say, okay, because now it's legal, I should be able to allow you to come to work impaired. No more than drunk, no more than anything else. You can't come to work impaired, period. Okay, under any circumstance, no matter what the law says. Because I am concerned about the safety of my individuals.
Just to be clear, House Bill 523 protects the employers.
I'm not saying that, but never, you know what, deep pocket. Here's what I can tell you. I don't care what the House bill says. You're going to get sued, okay? You're going to get sued. You're going to be a named party to it, and I don't care what it means, whether I pay or don't pay. It's going to have an impact on my bottom line, all right? And in that regards, where the insurance company pays or I can't be, it's going to be a distraction. Here's what I would hope. Come to work not impaired. I don't care what your drug of choice is.
Hi, my question is about manufacturers hiring to fill a skills gap today versus tomorrow. 2 weeks ago, I was in Washington, D.C., invited to participate in a National Academy of Science conversation on the needs for adaptability, especially in technical areas. So someone might want a career in manufacturing, but that doesn't mean they want to be a welder for the next 30 years. We need to develop adaptability, yet most manufacturers that I see need a CNC operator today to get orders out the door today. So how can we get manufacturers to look longer term and look at somebody who can run a CNC operation or welding or whatever soon, maybe not today, but soon, but they have the adaptability skills, the interest, the curiosity to be a good employee for the next 30 years as all those jobs change?
I'll take it.
Just very, that's a great question, by the way, and I think that's something that a lot of folks are having conversations about and thinking about. There's definitely a need to recognize the upskilling, and because the technology is transformative in manufacturing, especially the digital revolution and robotics and artificial intelligence. And it's not necessarily going to be those replacing the workers, but it's going to augment their work. And so having a plan in place and having some resources focused on that, I think is going to be very important. But in addition to can you read, can you write, can you pass a drug test, I think it's also, you're going to need someone who is a good problem solver, who's very collaborative, who can work in a virtual setting with folks, who can, I think we're headed into a much bigger era of mass customization as well, and so it's not going to be the same thing all the time. And so the employers need to embed that into their hiring screening, and they also need to be talking to the service providers about how that's built into the curriculum and all of that. I know those conversations are taking place, but they have to happen even faster because this technology is being deployed really rapidly. I saw Elon Musk, I mean, this is in another sector, but Elon Musk was talking about having this truck that will be virtually autonomous that will go 500 miles on a battery. I mean, we wouldn't have imagined that 30 years ago that was possible. And we won't even know, there'll be some cool gadget 10 years from now, and no one has any idea what that is today or the types of skills that it'll take to make that.
But companies also have to be very careful, because I know the companies that we talk to, they are thinking that far ahead. The challenge becomes when they start to try to hire now for that. And so what we're seeing is that CNC machinists now might say they want a bachelor's degree, when in fact, you don't need a bachelor's degree to be a CNC machinist, and most who could fill the job don't have it. And so now you're kind of creating a gap that exists now, trying to get those skills you need for the future. So what Scott was talking about is really paramount to the conversation. You have to look at what your training investment commitment is now for those next level of jobs, because you will have to hire that non-degreed CNC machinist now and then invest in that individual so that you can train them up for those skill sets they're going to need in the future.
So I would only say, one, as an employee, you should be entitled to a very good and adequate and accurate review, at least once a year, maybe more often. Okay, and if you're having a review, you have to advocate for yourself. So if you're stuck in this job and you believe you have no advancement skills, you probably should look for another place to go be employed. On the other side, within the organizational structure, what I find is too many people don't self-advocate for themselves. You know, they'll complain, but when it comes down to the review, they're not writing or saying anything that says, I want something better and more. And so you don't know necessarily the good worker, you know, his personal desire or her personal desire for advancement if they don't say anything about themselves. So one, you want the people who also self-advocate and have some degree of aggression. All what they said is true. The other thing which I find really interesting is that nobody's willing to move. Okay, so I may have a job in Detroit, you know, and you're in Cleveland, but you can't move. You're not going to move. I got an aging parent, or my spouse has got a job. And so what we're finding that's really different today is the mobility of your workforce is really kind of rooted where they're at, much more so than they were 10, 20, 30 years ago. You know, it used to be you moved everywhere. Now nobody moves. So I would just say self-advocacy. From the standpoint, if you're a CNC operator, you've been there for 10 years, you have a desire to do something more, you ought to tell somebody. So self-advocacy I find to be the easiest way. We'll put the training in. We'll do the education reimbursement. We'll send you to college. We'll do all those things. But you got to also somewhat let us know that that's what you want for yourself.
Today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a Friday forum on the future of manufacturing in Ohio. Today's forum is presented by Citizens Bank with additional support from Magnet. We thank all of you for being here today, and that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, Alicia and Scott and Michael, and thank you, Elizabeth, for moderating, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Payne Fund, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.